Krystal, there's so much happening in Russia right now, and it's hard to really understand exactly what's going on.
Yes, this is very difficult to sort through. So we're just going to go through what is being reported in the press right now, and always take these reports with a grain of salt, because I think it is very much an open question. Even, I've been talking to our friend Yegor, who's in Moscow, even for people that are there on the ground, very uncertain what's exactly is going on. So first, put this up on the screen. We got this is from Western intelligence officials, so keep that in mind. They are saying that Prigozhin, actually his plan was to capture Russian military leaders as part of last weekend's mutiny. He accelerated his plans after the country's domestic intelligence agency became aware of the plot. And they say that the plot's premature launch was among the factors that could explain why it failed so quickly after 36 hours when Prigozhin struck that deal with Lukashenko, called off the armed march on Moscow that had initially faced little resistance. So the original idea, according to Western intelligence officials, is that he was going to capture Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov, chief of Russia's general staff, during a visit to a southern region that borders Ukraine that the two were planning. But because the FSB found out about that plan 2 days before it was to be executed, he pushed up the plans and launched this less poorly executed, less well thought out situation, because it was sort of rushed into being. They thought that this kind of bothers me, Emily. So according to this report, Western officials believe the original plot had a good chance of success, but failed after the conspiracy was leaked. And the reason that I took note of that is because the Biden administration pointedly did not say anything about the fact that they apparently had knowledge of this plot, did not, alert the Russians, didn't alert the world, et cetera. And if you thought this had a good chance of success, like, that's kind of insane, because you're talking about just like standing back while this mercenary madman takes control of a nuclear-armed superpower and just like crossing your fingers and hoping for the best.
Right.
I think that's pretty reckless.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree. I actually think that's similar to what we've seen with the bridge over and over again. And actually with the bridge, we've seen this with Nord Stream too, is that you see Western intelligence officials basically leaking to the press to cover themselves in a way that actually doesn't make themselves look great. It makes them look like they're either wrongfully assessing situations or not acting in ways that are actually productive. And this is just another part of that pattern as far as I'm reading it right now.
Yeah, let's put the New York Times reporting that we have up on the screen as well, which is, additional context. And I think they were the first to report some of these details. They say that a Russian general actually knew about the mercenary chief's rebellion plans. Again, according to U.S. officials, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, may have believed that he had support in Russia's military. Now, let me tell you why this is really significant. They're alleging here that General Sergei Surovikin, I'm sure I'm screwing that up, my apologies, former top Russian commander in Ukraine, helped to plan Prigozhin's actions last weekend, which posed the most dramatic threat to President Vladimir Putin in his 23 years of power. American officials, they point out, have an interest in pushing out information that undermines the standing of General Surovikin, whom they view as more competent and more ruthless than other members of the command. His removal, they say, would undoubtedly benefit Ukraine, whose Western-backed troops are pushing a new counteroffensive that is meant to try to win back territory seized by Moscow. So the insinuation here is that U.S. officials might be pushing this narrative because, listen, Prigozhin was one of the more effective leaders in terms on the Russian side with his band of mercenaries, one of the more effective leaders. They now have taken him out of play. Not taken him out of play. Russians have taken him out of play. Now, if Surovikin is also taken out of play, well, these two things are quite significant to Ukraine's odds and Ukraine's chances within their counteroffensive, because you're talking about two of what Western officials at least view as the most effective and most competent military leaders that Russia had on their side. And there is fairly credible reporting this morning that Surovikin has been detained by the Kremlin. that he, is expected to have collaborated or at least known about Prigozhin's plans, and so he is, being held right now. That's the reporting. Nobody can really fully confirm it, but it is an interesting turn of events. I'll just say that.
Yes, it is, and we're told over and over again that the end goal here is nothing short for the West and for the United States of regime change, and that's why there's Western intelligence official leaks or comments to the press right now are really strange to me because they're, not strange, actually, they're perfectly logical, but they're really trying to emphasize discord within the ranks. And whether or not that's true, I think is an open question, given the fact that our only acceptable end game as our American lawmakers and officials in the West have said over and over again, the only acceptable end is regime change, then it makes complete sense. You're starting to leak from Western intelligence officials to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journal, that Putin is weak and that there's discord in the ranks. And that's exactly what we're seeing after this coup is continued Western intelligence officials saying that there's just too much discord, that Putin is, really in trouble this time, et cetera, et cetera. And that, given the only indication we have of what could end this war in an acceptable way to the Ann Applebaums of the world and the politicians who read her essays in The Atlantic, if that's regime change, then the motivation here makes me doubt the veracity.
I already have seen the Ukraine hawks seizing on what happened here to say, look how weak Putin is.
Yes.
Look at how, they were able to march so close to Moscow and he barely did anything and, let this guy just get off the hook and go to Belarus. And that means that his red lines don't mean anything. Ergo, we should continue to push the bounds of what may corner him. Maybe he is a red line that he's drawn. This is justification why we should do even more. I'm already seeing them make that case. In terms of the public perception, I think these things are a little bit hard to gauge in immediate real time. But put this up on the screen. I did find this interesting. We did have a trend of decreasing U.S. public support for continuing military aid. That has been the trend for some months now. We now have a new poll that goes in the opposite direction. And it is not lost on me that this poll was taken, people responded to it just shortly after this whole Russian attempted coup situation unfolded. Put this up on the screen, guys. You've got 81% of Democrats, 56% of Republicans, so even a majority of Republicans, and 57% of independents favor supplying U.S. weapons to Ukraine. As I said, it was concluded on Tuesday. Charted a sharp rise in backing for arming Ukraine, with 65% overall of respondents approving of the shipments. That's compared with 46% in this same poll last month. So, for me, with polls, the absolute numbers are less accurate than the directional change. So the fact that in this one poll, you have almost a 20% movement towards in favor of arming Ukraine in 1 month shows me that probably there was a real response to this Russian coup attempt and refocused attention on the Ukrainian cause, made people feel like, we got them on the ropes, we just do a little more, maybe we're going to be able to have an outcome that we want here. So I think it's interesting to see that public movement.
It is, and whether or not the intelligence is accurate and the read on the situation that is being pushed in Western media by Western intelligence is accurate, that is exactly I think it's pretty clear that's exactly what the Pentagon and the sort of NATO sect wants American voters to think. And as those numbers dipped, there was clearly a lot of nervousness about it. As Kevin McCarthy started saying, well, I don't know, there was clearly a lot of nervousness about it. And so, again, I'm not actually disputing that any of this may have happened. I don't know.
Right.
And I think that's the best thing people in the media can say right now is clearly, to your point, you can talk to people on the ground in Russia who don't know.
Yeah.
So for people sitting in their air-conditioned studios to say that they know exactly what's happening in Russia and Putin's on his last leg is just nonsense.
Yeah.
But whether or not it's true, the intelligence narrative is taking hold. And one of the things I found very interesting about this poll is that when you tied it to China in particular, you get 76% of Americans saying that providing aid to Ukraine demonstrates to China and other rivals that the U.S. has, quote, the will and capability to protect our interests, our allies, and ourselves. That's higher than I think what you would get if you didn't ask that question specifically tied to China.
For sure.
And that's another probably that is going in the binder over on the Hill for the press people and the policy people.
Yeah, the people that are finger in the wind. are going to pay attention to this poll. The last piece of this, well, there's a lot of questions still open, but this was an important coda as well. So what is going to happen to the Wagner Group that Prigozhin was head of, this group of mercenaries that were not only operating in Ukraine, I mean, they were involved in Syria, they are involved in Africa, they really have a pretty wide footprint. Until recently, Putin denied that they were even linked to the Russian state, which everyone could clearly see through. But now that is being openly acknowledged. And so put this up on the screen. This is also reporting from the Wall Street Journal. They say that the Kremlin is setting out to seize full control of Wagner's global empire. You've got some details here. Russia's deputy foreign minister flew to Damascus to personally deliver a message to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. You have senior Russian foreign ministry officials phoning the president of the Central African Republic, whose personal bodyguards include Wagner mercenaries. You have government jets from Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations, interesting, shuttled from Syria to Mali, another of Wagner's key foreign outposts. The rush of diplomatic activity reflected Putin's attempt to play down the chaos at home, to assure Russia's partners in Africa and the Middle East that Wagner operations there could continue without interruption, and that those operations would just now be under new management. There has, even on this question of, like, it would seem obvious to me that Wagner is going to be certainly banned from Russian soil, right? But probably, completely subsumed under the Ministry of Defense, et cetera, et cetera. There's also competing reporting from on the ground in Moscow that from inside of Russia, that the Wagner recruitment centers are up and operational even within Russia, acting as if nothing happened, which seems insane to me. So even with this, there's also competing reporting about where Prigozhin actually is. There was some reporting that he is still in Russia in St. Petersburg, whereas others are saying, no, he's already, he's in Belarus, where he is supposed to be based on the agreement that was struck. So still a lot that is shaking out, a lot of questions about how this all plays out. There's a lot of questions over whether this ends up being just like a historical blip that doesn't really change the course of anything, or whether it ends up being a key linchpin either for the future of, leadership in Russia or the future of the Ukraine war. There's just a lot we don't know. So trying to sort through every piece of information we've got here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Wagner has been a pretty central part of Russia as we know it, like to their, as he's put it, global empire, and to the way that they function as a country and as a huge player in the geopolitical stage. So this is a big change, but that would explain why some reports say that Wagner offices, recruitment offices, are still up and running in Russia, because obviously there has to be a way to deal with this in a sense that's not a total divorce.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.